All right. So, hello. I'm here with Karl Meyer, who I read about online, and I found that he is a longtime political activist. Um, I found him through reading about his father, who was a U.S. representative from the state of Vermont and one of the founders of the Liberty Union Party. So, do you have like a introduction
Well,
or a...
incidentally, Kristen, last Sunday I was having breakfast here in Chicago with an old friend of mine, and she told me that she had gone on Bernie Sanders' website and had looked a biographical section about Bernie Sanders, and that one of the images shown and the description of Bernie Sanders, presumably his start in Vermont politics, was Bernie Sanders with some other young people uh, at the home of my mother and father in West Rupert, Vermont.
Yep.
And Bernie Sanders is 4 or 5 years younger than I am. But Liberty Union, as I understand it, was started by a lot of young people and who were dissatisfied with the Vietnam War policy of Lyndon Johnson, as my father was. And my father and mother were sort of godparents, as I understand it, to Liberty Union in its founding. And I believe my father ran on the Liberty Union ticket. I think he ran for Senate on the Liberty Union ticket.
Yeah. So I read online that the Liberty Union ran several candidates in the 1970s for Senate and House, and yeah, your father was one of them.
And my father was in Congress with George McGovern when George McGovern uh, was a freshman congressman from South Dakota, and my father was I think they had only one congressman also, and my father was the newly elected congressman from Vermont, uh, elected in 1958. And I have copy of a letter in my file from uh, uh, George McGovern in 1960, donating something like $60 to my father's reelection campaign, with a letter in which he said how much he appreciated my father. And he said, "Bill, you are the conscience of all of us in the House." And to be the conscience of George McGovern
Yeah, that must have meant
is
something.
a recommendation, because George McGovern was one of the finest men that ever ran on a party ticket in the United States for president of the United States. And the fact that he was defeated in
72.
1972 by, and my father hadn't run for office in Vermont because he had run several times, I think in 60 for Congress again, and then in 64 for the Senate, and then I guess but in 72, he wanted to support the campaign of George McGovern, and he ran again, I think, for Senate uh, on the ticket with George McGovern. I don't know if it was a Democrat or a Liberty Union.
I'm pretty sure after he was not reelected for the U.S. House, I think every election after that, I think he was with the Liberty Union.
The
Um,
Liberty Union was only started in 67 or 68, wasn't it?
1970.
1970.
Yes.
Now, my parents always spoke of a young man. He had a French Canadian name, and they always spoke him as sort of he was from Burlington, and they spoke of him as a spark plug of the Liberty Union. Do you know who I'm talking about? Or
I'm not sure. You said he had a French accent.
name, a last
Oh,
name,
French last name.
a French French-Canadian last name. I think his first name was Danny.
No, I'm not familiar with anybody that fits that
And
description.
several, and then he had a restaurant later in life in Burlington or South Burlington, I'm not sure. And I was visiting my brother who lives still in West Rupert, or lives again in West Rupert after being a professor of biochemistry at the University of Vermont for all of his professional career. And my brother retired to Vermont to take care of my mother when she was becoming senile. And this Denny, I think it became Barbo or something like that. My brother had him over to dinner with myself and my brother when I was visiting, probably in the early 1990s,
Hmm.
or in the early part of the 2000, sometime around that time.
All right, interesting. So, when was the last time that you were in Vermont? How long have you been out of the state?
Well, I never lived in Vermont. I went to the University of Chicago when I was 16, and I never lived in Vermont again, but I visited my parents probably every 3 years or so. And then the last time I was there, I believe for my 60th high school reunion,
Hmm.
and next year will be my 65th high school reunion.
Interesting. So, you grew up in Vermont and then you went to college in Chicago and you lived out in the Midwest ever since?
And then I lived in Chicago for 40 years
Okay.
before I moved to Nashville.
Okay.
And actually, I became very active in the pacifist movement and the nonviolent action pacifist movement with the Committee for Nonviolent Action and the War Resisters League and the Peacemaker movement before my father got started in politics. And the year that he announced his candidacy in 1958 he initially announced as a candidate for the Senate, but then the Democratic Party, a man named Fred Fayette wanted to run for the Senate, and the party persuaded my father to switch to the representatives race because they did not have a good candidate for the House of Representatives. And so my father switched to the House. I was with them, my mother and father, in Vermont when we drove across the border to Salem, New York, to post his notices of his campaign, his announcement of his campaign, to all the newspapers and media outlets in Vermont. And that was in 1958. And I was up there visiting them after my second arrest with Dorothy Day and Ammon Hennessy and other Catholic workers for refusing to participate in the compulsory nuclear air raid drills in New York City. In 1957, I was living in New York and working as a stock clerk in the basement of Barnes & Noble when they had only one store. And I raced out at noontime to go down to the Catholic Worker. They had never met me. And I went in and I said I wanted to join them in refusing to take shelter during these compulsory air raid drills. So I was arrested with them and I was sentenced to 30 days in prison. And I was at the notorious Rikers Island juvenile prison, which the state of New York, or the city of New York, has just recently announced that they were finally going to close Rikers Island because it's always been a very problematical prison. So then I went back from Chicago to New York in 1958 for the purpose of joining with the Catholic worker Dorothy Day and Hammond Hennessy and others in refusing to take shelter. And that year, we got a 15-day suspended sentence. So I had thought I was going to serve some time in jail, so I'd taken off some time from work, and that's when I went up to Vermont. So I went up to Vermont to visit my parents when I didn't have to go to jail. And I have always believed that my father, who had strong views against war and against nuclear weapons, that he was moved to action by my action for 2 years before he announced for Congress.
So this was
Because
in
really
the late
horse.
50s?
It was really a dark horse race. He had never run for political office in Vermont before. He was a professional forester. At the time, he was executive director of the Vermont Forest and Farmland Foundation, which was founded and funded by the estate, the money in the estate of George Merck III, the CEO, chairman of the board of Merck Pharmaceutical Company.
So
who
that
had a summer home on Rupert Mountain in our town.
so what was leading up to your father's run for House in 1958?
Yes,
Okay, so you think
I
that
believe that it was that inspired him to run, to take the risk, to give up his job and to jump into this race.
all right, interesting. So how did
And he was
he
really a long shot because he was the first Democrat elected to Congress
Yeah, that's what I was going to
from the
say.
state of Vermont since the Civil War.
Yeah.
Now, I don't know if you know that our Republican senators and congressmen from Vermont were some of the most progressive and excellent senators.
Yeah.
Senator Warren Austin from Vermont was the first United States representative of the United Nations. Senator George Aiken was sometimes chair of the Foreign Relations Committee and sometimes chair of the Agricultural Committee because he had a whole lot of seniority, and he was an excellent progressive Republican. And Senator Ralph Flanders was one of the most peace-oriented members of the United States Senate, along with, say, Hubert Humphrey at the time, back in the 50s. And Senator Flanders was the first member of the United States Senate to rise on the Senate floor and denounce Senator Joseph McCarthy. So Flanders was a fine progressive and a humanistic person also. So, and then we've almost always had good senators.
Yeah, Winston Prouty.
Winston Prouty, my parents had a lot of respect for Prouty, and there was a lot of mutual respect among the Democrats and the Republicans. Winston Prouty, I remember my parents telling me, or maybe I read in the paper or something like that, that when Winston Prouty ran for re-election, I think and I don't know if it was his first or his second or third term, or I don't know what term it was, but he spent only $60 on his reelection campaign.
Yeah, he didn't have to spend much, thousands and
And
millions of dollars.
my father, uh, didn't have a lot of money, and he didn't raise a lot of money, and uh, he he uh, he spent very little money on his first election campaign. For his second election campaign, uh, you could say his personality was quite different. But my father was uh, Ocasio-Cortez of the 1958 Congress.
Yeah, I guess you could
He
say
voted.
that.
There was one vote where the military budget, or I don't know if it was the military budget or the military appropriations bill. Uh, I think it was the budget. The vote was, what is it, 434 to 1. My father was the only person to vote against the military budget. He
It
was, he always voted against, he was one of a handful of congressmen who voted, always voted against the uh, continuation of the so-called House On-American Activities Committee. He voted against the renewal of the military draft. My father was the darling of the American peace movement. Once he was in Congress and started speaking out, he was, uh, and uh,
so
many progressive, a number of progressive media people and celebrities came to Vermont and did fundraising events and endorsed my father.
so they restarted the draft in what year? 61? 60?
What's that?
What
Well, I
year
don't know the details of when, but
for
it's my
Vietnam?
recollection that he voted against renewal of conscription, selective service conscription.
Hmm.
And in 1959, I got a conscientious objector classification when I turned 18 in 1955. But by 1959, I was influenced by Ammon Hennessy and my radical views to renounce any cooperation with selective service. So I tore up my registration card, tore it in half, and my classification card, my 1-0 conscientious objector classification card, and returned them to the draft board in New York uh, with a letter saying that I would no longer cooperate. And they improperly reclassified me as 1A, available for military service. It certainly wasn't appropriate to reclassify me as 1A. You were required by law to carry a draft card, so
Did they just automatically requalify people?
they reclassified me as 1A and ordered me to report for a physical. Now, it was a felony not to report for the physical, but instead of reporting for the physical, I went out with the Committee for Nonviolent Action and did a trespassing action at one of the first Atlas intercontinental ballistic missile bases being built in Meade, Nebraska,
Hmm.
between Lincoln and what's the big city in Nebraska?
Springfield? Or no, that's
No,
not
no,
Nebraska.
uh,
Omaha.
Omaha, halfway between Omaha and Lincoln. They were building missile bases, and we did a nonviolent action project, and I was the first person to be arrested with A.J. Musty, a 75-year-old pacifist leader, and Ross Anderson, an elderly uh, Methodist, I think, minister. And we were sentenced to 6 months probation. And I told the judge I would not accept the probation because the condition was that we not be found within 50 yards of any military installation for a year. And I went back to the base to demonstrate outside 2 days later. So I got 6 months in federal prison. I was the first of the trespassers because we went over in teams of 2 or 3, and AJ Musty Ross and I were the first team to go over. AJ and Ross accepted the probation.
So,
And my father wrote a long, I think, 2-page letter to the federal judge who sentenced me and denounced him for violating my First Amendment rights by setting as a condition of probation that I not be demonstrating or present outside of any military base. Because it's a constitutional right to speak out. You can't
yeah.
it's improper to set it as a condition of probation that a person not exercise their First Amendment rights.
So, what year was this?
That was 1959. That
Okay.
was the year I tore up my draft cards and sent them non-cooperation, and the year that I engaged in that nonviolent action.
So, what year did you start participating in these nonviolent actions and these, um, I'm not sure what you'd call them, these
Well, the refusal
protest
to
sort of things?
the refusal to participate in the compulsory nuclear air raid drills, my first arrest, my first trial, my first conviction. And I was a juvenile under New York state law at the time. I was only 20 years old.
So, 1957?
1957. Now, Ammon Hennessy and Dorothy Day and some of the Local Resistors League people had been refusing to participate from starting in 1955, which I think was the first year of the compulsory air raid drills. But I don't know if you've ever seen the film Atomic Cafe, and if you've ever read about the on 9/11, when 2 airplanes without explosives crashed into the World Trade Center and caused so much damage in Manhattan. And back in the late 1950s, there was a serious fear that nuclear war could break out between the Soviet Union and the United States. And that's why they had all these civil defense preparations. But imagine what it would be like to try to take shelter in lower Manhattan or anywhere in New York City from a 50 megaton nuclear weapon, so much larger than the bombs that fell on Hiroshima and Nagasaki. So the response of the government and the propaganda of the government about defending against nuclear war or surviving nuclear war was so bizarre and so ridiculous. And we just were not willing to cooperate with it. And we read the Progressive magazine. My mother and father voted for Norman Thomas, the social candidate.
Yeah, I've heard of him.
Because they were not happy with Harry Truman. I liked Harry Truman, but I disagreed with him about military and foreign policy.
Yeah. Well, did you have an opinion on Henry Wallace?
Well, I think my parents liked Henry Wallace. I was too young for Henry Wallace. I was born in 1937, so when Wallace ran for president in
48.
was it 48?
You would have been 11.
Huh?
You would have been 11 and even younger when he was vice president and secretary of agriculture.
Well, yeah, I've read some about him since, and I have a lot of respect for Henry Wallace. Yeah, he was one of our better politicians.
So, um, later on, so after you were involved with these demonstrations, anti-war demonstrations, pacifist demonstrations, and so on, in the 50s and 60s. When did you become aware of what was going on in Vermont with the Liberty Union Party and what your father was up to
Well, I mean,
after he left Congress?
whenever I visited Vermont, I corresponded rather regularly with my mother and sometimes with my father, and uh, my father was pretty much retired after he did well. Kennedy, he lost in 1960, and Nixon defeated Kennedy in Vermont, I believe, by about 5,000 votes. But my father was defeated by only 1,000 votes, about 1,000 votes. So my father ran ahead of Kennedy in Vermont. But when he was elected president, Kennedy appointed a wonderful uh, representative from Arizona, I believe he was, Morris Udall. And I think that one of his nephews or sons or relatives is serving in Congress now, Udall. And
Yeah,
they were
I've
very
Tom
huh?
Udall, I believe.
What's that?
Is it Tom Udall? That sounds familiar.
Yes, I think so, yeah. I'm not sure his relationship to Morris Udall. There were two brothers, Morris Udall and another brother, and they, at one point, they were both in Congress. But Kennedy appointed, I think it was Morris Udall, as Secretary of the Interior. And when my father was defeated in 1960, Kennedy and his administration appointed my father to an appointed job at the Interior Department. And so he served a couple of years there, I think. But he really didn't have paid employment very much after the defeat in 1960. And so I had regular correspondence with them, and I visited every few years with my children and so on. And so they always talked about politics and what was going on. Denny Barbeau or Denny something like that. Look up Liberty Union. I think he was one of the key people in Liberty Union.
Um, Let
But
me
they
see
always
here.
talked about
Dennis Morrisseau?
huh?
Dennis Morrisseau?
Marceau?
Yeah.
That could be it. Is it?
Morrisseau?
Yeah, that was it. Denny Marceau. Yeah,
Okay.
that was the person that they talked about most, and that was the person that my brother invited to have dinner with us maybe 20 years ago when I was visiting my brother in Vermont.
Okay.
So, and then my father became active. He was well known in the peace movement and highly respected in the American peace movement.
Yeah, so
And the strongest voice for peace in the American Congress, and an early advocate of recognition of China, mainland China, at a time when Nixon and so on were red baiting people about who lost China. You know, Nixon just did a total flip flop on his approach to China.
Yeah.
After his election as president.
So it was later on in the 60s and 70s.
Oh yeah, he got elected from California by bashing the Democrats as having lost China to the communists.
Yeah, that was kind of a cheap
His first
thing that
election
they could
campaign
use.
Congress was famous for the fact that there was a liberal Democratic congresswoman from that district, and his campaign put out leaflets on pink paper, implying that she was a pinko, you know, a communist sympathizer.
Yeah.
He was always a dirty tricks politician.
Yeah.
And so the fact that someone like that the American electorate will vote for someone like Tricky Dick, the crook Nixon, over someone like George McGovern by a landslide.
Yeah.
1970.
Yeah. I mean, I've read that in that election, the Democratic Party itself was working against McGovern, tipping the weight of the scale towards Nixon.
Well, yeah. And we have this concern now, too, you know, that some of our best Democrats, like somebody like Bernie Sanders, they say he's not electable.
Yeah, and you look at who's saying that, and it's mostly Democratic establishment people.
You see, my politics is very similar to that of Bernie, although he's much less strong on the peace issue than I am. But I can't run for public office because I have a criminal record a mile long for nonviolent protest action.
I mean, Eugene Debs would say otherwise, but...
Well, I could run.
I mean,
in Tennessee, you can qualify to run for public office, local office, with only 25 signatures.
Okay.
As an independent.
Are you allowed to run from a jail cell?
Huh?
Are you allowed to run from inside a jail cell?
Well, I don't know whether a person, I'm pretty sure a person convicted of a misdemeanor could probably run from a jail cell, yeah.
Well, I'm just referring to...
Why should I run? I wouldn't win.
Yeah, I'm just referring to...
We have a 3/4 supermajority of Republicans, and I don't know which is worse, the Tennessee legislature, Texas, Mississippi. I don't know which is worse, but Tennessee is really in the running for the worst Republican, so-called conservative. Republican. Yeah. There's a great deal of misuse of the words conservative and liberal in American politics.
Yeah, definitely. I think those labels are...
nothing conservative about the conservatives.
Yeah, the Republicans, yeah.
The only thing they're interested in conserving is their own money, you know?
Yeah, conserving the status quo and the corporate welfare.
They don't want to conserve our constitutional liberties
or the environment.
Or the environment, or...
Yeah. So...
our traditions.
Yeah. So, something I wanted to ask you about is, so in today's modern politics, where do you see the dynamic between the Republican and Democratic parties going, and whether or not you could see third parties fitting into that if the Democratic Party refuses to move to the progressive side and embrace the progressive wing of the Democratic Party, or if they stay with the corporatists. What's your opinion on that?
Well, structurally, in state constitutions and state legislatures and law, and in federal law and so on, the two-party system is so strongly entrenched in the winner-take-all electoral systems. I've had many friends in the radical movement and in the peace movement and the social justice movement that I've been active in now for 62 years, who have participated in different third-party efforts. And Liberty Union still survives, I guess, and thrives to some extent in Vermont. Is that correct?
Yeah, they were running a lot of candidates every single year, but Peter Diamondstone, their sort of patriarch, he passed away in 2017, so they've been a little bit less active since, but I think they still had candidates on the
Oh, yeah.
ballot
My
in
parents used to
2018.
speak about Peter Diamondstone, yeah. But uh, we have a Green Party, and a number of my good friends in Nashville, Tennessee, are key people in the Green Party in Tennessee. But structurally and constitutionally, it's so difficult to succeed with the third party. So, in terms of uh, political reality, what I have always advocated is that the progressives run in the Democratic primary
So
and run
Like Bernie's
strong
doing.
progressive uh, strong progressive platform uh, in the primaries.
Yeah, so that's the route that Bernie's taking, trying to sort of do a
Yeah,
takeover of the Democratic Party,
I mean,
and
because what could he do as an independent in the presidential race?
yeah, and I think if you look at Bernie's electoral history, you can see he's ran as an independent his whole career, defeating both Democrats and Republicans. But he has also worked with people within those parties to help change the political dynamic within those parties, in Congress and in the state of Vermont.
Yeah.
So, what do you think about getting into the Democratic Party and reforming it and getting some progressive laws passed, getting electoral reform laws passed, and then making it easier through reform for third parties to become more viable in a
Well,
new electoral system?
I'm not very active in party politics in Tennessee. Nashville has nonpartisan government. Although in our state legislature, our state representatives and our state senators, and uh, in our district, the state representative is a friend of mine. She's well, I call her a friend, but I've supported her when she was in the Metropolitan Council. I supported her for election as state representative. And last year or 2 years ago, I supported her in the campaign for the state Senate. She's an African American in the neighborhood where I live. And then after she went to the state legislature, her daughter ran for council member of the local city county government council member. And she won in the district immediately adjacent to the district that I live in. And I supported her for 2 terms. She's term limited in Nashville to 2 4-year terms as a council member. Then I supported her for 2 terms as council, one of the 5 seats for the whole county. So I'm very active in that nonpartisan local Nashville City, Nashville Davidson County government.
So all
But
the
those offices are nonpartisan.
So yeah, so
but they're held almost all by Democrats.
all the parties at the
A
municipal
few
level in
so-called.
Tennessee are nonpartisan.
What's that?
All the municipal levels in Tennessee are nonpartisan.
Yes.
Because, for example,
Well, I'm not sure.
in Burlington, Vermont, they are
I'm not
partisan.
sure if that's in state law or just in the national charter.
Hmm. But
I think maybe Memphis has a party government. I think it may be just in the Nashville Davidson County charter.
okay, so
And a friend of mine I have a Catholic worker affiliated community with seven. I'm a carpenter, and I acquired with a partner over the years. Uh, Invested in financing seven different vacant houses in our neighborhood, which is was a very depressed neighborhood. And using my carpentry and building skills, I restored these houses and rent them out to young people and activists in Chicago or in Nashville. So, uh, how did I get started on that? So, but I'm very active in defense of our neighborhood against gentrification and so on. And
yeah. So in Vermont, have you heard much about the Progressive Party, which has formed kind of in the wake of Bernie Sanders since the 1980s?
no, there's a second, third party or a fourth party.
Yeah, you could think of it that way. They've kind of pushed Liberty Union to the fourth party. So
Oh,
the Progressive Party,
they're polling better than Liberty Union.
yeah, way higher. So the Progressive Party started in the early 80s when Bernie was mayor. And since then, they've become a fully recognized major party in the state.
Oh, so what percentage do they poll?
Well, we don't always run against the Democratic Party, but
Oh,
we do have several members of the state legislature, the lieutenant governor, state
yeah.
auditor, and
Oh,
de facto we have the U.S. Senator Bernie Sanders as well. So
but Bernie doesn't run on the Progressive Party ticket,
no,
or both, or he runs on both.
he's endorsed by
Can
the
someone run on
progressives.
both?
No, well, some are
In New
endorsed.
York, there's a third party. In New York State, there's a third party. I forget the name of it, and people can run on both tickets.
Yeah, I know about that one,
Democrats
the
often
Liberal
run on
Party.
both. Huh?
But it's called the Liberal Party of New York.
Yeah.
But in Vermont, there are several people that run as progressives and Democrats.
Hmm.
But Bernie runs as an independent, endorsed by the progressives.
Yeah. Well, uh, I always say that Vermont is by far the most progressive state in the union, and the best state in the. I don't regard myself as a citizen of the United States. I never joined the organization. I wouldn't join the organization. I wouldn't join the mafia. I don't join terrorist imperialist organizations. I regard myself as a Vermonter.
Yeah,
If you want a geographical and political identity, I'm a Vermonter.
yeah,
Um, I describe myself as an anarchist, but anarchist in the sense that, well, I didn't vote for many years. I was more orthodox anarchist. But uh, the question of your citizenship or your belonging is a question of sovereignty. Who retains sovereignty? Do you yield sovereignty to uh, political organizations or to states? I don't yield my sovereignty. I'm my own sovereign. And I don't to any party. And I go with Tom Paine, whom I admire greatly. Have you ever read any of Tom Paine?
I'm not very familiar with him, but I know he was one of the revolutionaries, and I'm not sure if he's one of the founding fathers, but he was around that time.
No, he wasn't one of the founding fathers, but he was a propagandist who wrote uh, a pamphlet called Common Sense. These are the times that try men's souls, the summer soldier and the sunshine patriot, and so on. He was very eloquent. He was an immigrant from England. He was a stay maker, a corset maker. Uh, and Modern Library has or did have an edition. I don't even Modern Library is still published, but they were published by Random House, and they had an edition of his collected works. But he participated in the American Revolution. Then he went to France, and he participated in the French Revolution. And he was elected to a seat in the French Assembly during the French Revolution. And then he was trying to foment a revolution like the French Revolution in England. And he wrote a book called The Rights of Man.
Yeah, I've heard of
And
that.
it's a great read, even in our day. And when I was doing organizing on the issue of war tax refusal, of which I was one of the most influential people in the country, writing about it and showing people how to do war tax refusal during the Vietnam War, in my writings, I quoted from Paine's writing about military taxes in The Rights of Man. And what he says in The Rights of Man is that governments always go to war and they raise the taxes to finance their wars. But then when the war is over, they never lower the taxes again.
Yeah, so it's like a staircase. It just keeps going up and up and up.
It keeps going up and up, yeah. And so I think you would enjoy reading Tom Paine, The Rights of Man, and he has what he was not an atheist. He was like Washington and Jefferson. He was
A deist?
a deist, yes. And his other book is about religion and faith. I'm forgetting the title of it right now.
So,
He was wonderful, wonderful in the rhetoric of writing, with a lot of that gift for writing that Thoreau had to such a great extent.
so I have a question now. In terms of the political system that we have today and how divisive it is with the two parties kind of controlling everything, do you think that with the Republican and Democratic parties kind of controlling everything for their own establishments respectively, do you think that we're getting farther away from the vision of the founding fathers that they had planned out for the country?
Well, I just finished about a month ago, a book called Founding Brothers. And it's a book about the relationship between John Adams, Thomas Jefferson, Alexander Hamilton, and the one that killed Hamilton,
Aaron Burr?
Aaron Burr. It focuses on those four and their relationship. And the spirit of partisan politics.
So two of them were Federalist. Two of them were Federalist, and two of them were Democratic Republicans. Correct?
Yeah.
Yep.
And the politics was very bitter. But in the last chapter of the book, Adams and Jefferson reconcile. But they were bitter enemies in the elections. And And the kind of nasty, dirty politics and the lies and so on, there was just as much of that back then. But in the 50s, when I was growing up, in the 40s and 50s, when I first became, and I'm a Gandhian. Gandhi was assassinated when I was 10 years old, and my mother turned my attention to Gandhi, and I started reading about Gandhi, and I bought into, or didn't buy into, I agreed with most of Gandhi's thinking about nonviolence. I think his ideas on sexuality are crazy, but his ideas on nonviolence and his political method are wonderful, because he will always talk to his adversaries and always negotiate. And in the 40s and 50s, the Senate and the Congress were much more collegial, and Republicans and Democrats worked together. And Joe Biden tried to feature that when he spoke about his relationship with Strom Thurmond.
Yeah.
And he really got shot down over that, but I felt sympathy with Biden, because we have a representative government, and it's a government which is based on reaching consensus on public policy with your adversaries or with people who disagree with you. And it's a very difficult compromise.
Yeah. And we kind of
But
lost that.
Ted Kennedy and Orrin Hatch, a strong Republican, so-called conservative, and Kennedy, one of the strongest liberals, Ted Kennedy, they worked together on health policy and education policy and so on. And they reached compromises. So I think what's happening in American politics is terrible. But unfortunately, in terms of my point of view, their ability to reach a bipartisan consensus on the military-industrial complex was always highly problematical. You know?
Yeah.
But they're still bipartisan in their support of military spending and basically imperial wars.
Yeah. So back in the 50s and 60s, it seems like the parties were able to compromise and get things done on behalf of the will of the American people a lot more. But
They did.
today,
I don't know. Yeah.
today
Well,
it seems that
did you see? There was a post going around on the internet, and of course Facebook sends me a lot of liberal and progressive stuff. Their algorithm. Once in a while, I get Trump campaign stuff. I don't know why, but there was a post going around a couple weeks ago, and it had an image of Dwight D. Eisenhower, and it had a quotation of policy positions from the Republican Party platform for the 1952 election. And it looked like a liberal Democratic platform.
Yeah. Yeah. So I was going to ask.
Well, like, Nixon, the Environmental Protection Agency, these people were liberal Democrats compared to the parties now.
Yeah. So I was going to ask, back then it seems like the parties were able to compromise and achieve a middle ground that was actually in line with the will of the people. But it seems like today, any time that the two parties get along and can agree on something, they're both agreeing in a way to screw over the American people. For instance, on foreign policy, both Republicans and Democrats vote for these bloated military budgets and for engaging in all these wars. Or they both vote to bail out Wall Street during the financial crash. etc.
Well, I think it was economically wise to bail out Wall Street, but they also sort of should. Well, I for abolition of prisons, but if they're going to send people to prison, they should have sent some of those people to prison, and they should. Well, they did make the banks pay back, and no, I think it was a wise economic policy to bail out the banks and not let the whole economy crash.
Yeah, but it's a matter of priorities with like there's so many other things
But
that we could be bailing out.
I think that there's something that's going on that I see going on in our culture. There's a an intense promotion of competition in American culture today. Uh, Sports teams, intense feeling of competition. Then on television, I've never owned a television, but I see it sometimes and at friends' houses, or when I'm in jail, I see it. And uh, uh, there are all these reality shows now, that so-called reality shows that are highly competitive. Bachelorette and Bachelor, where when a dozen young women are acting like jerks, pursuing one man and competing with each other to cut each other's throats with this one attractive bachelor. And then they have the Bachelorette, where the men are pursuing a woman, and and then they have other types of reality shows that are highly competitive. So, and for instance, my partner in Nashville, her children are highly focused on sports and competition, and they're bringing up their children. They have two lovely children, my partner's grandchildren, and but they're being brought up to be so intensely competitive, largely now in sports. But if they get into politics, they bring that sense of competition into politics too, rather
Yeah,
than cooperation.
yeah. So do you think that's just kind of pervasive in society now? It's becoming
I think it's a
part
I
of
think it's a cultural phenomenon that American culture is much more focused on intense competition than it was when I was younger.
yeah, and in politics, it's not just competition between Republicans and Democrats. It's competition between different factions. For instance, you have the progressive and left wings of the Democratic Party fighting and primarying against establishment and corporate uh, figures in the Democratic
Well,
Party, and it's very competitive, and there's not much cooperation to be made.
I think that I think that people should run in primaries, and my concern is that I never have a real representative in Congress because of this rigid two-party system. Um, the parliamentary systems in Israel, France, Germany,
Canada,
England, Canada, that allow multiple parties because they provide proportional representation and so on. Um, their politics is paralyzed also by the business of trying to form coalitions with multiple parties and form a governing majority. But if I'm in Israel or France or somewhere, I can probably find a party that really represents my point of view.
yeah, and have it be actually represented.
I can't find that. I could
Yeah.
find it in Vermont. I don't have many reservations about voting for Bernie Sanders in the primary.
Yeah, but the options are few and far between.
Yeah, it's very seldom that in my lifetime the parties have sponsored a politician that I could feel as positive about as I do about Bernie Sanders.
Yeah, and even now they're not really sponsoring him. They're kind of working
And
actively against him.
it's not only the political platform of Bernie Sanders, but it's also the way he conducts himself. He concerns himself with policy,
Yeah,
and and he doesn't concern himself with attacking other people.
yeah. Identity and all of these
He doesn't
surface
demean
level
or
things.
attack his political opponents in the primary. He doesn't say nasty things about them.
Yeah.
He presents a policy that's coherent and so on. I don't know why he shouts as much as he does, but
Well, he shouts because nobody seems to want to listen, so it's kind of part of his
well,
character. He wants
he's
to be
uh,
aggressive.
I have a strong, loud voice. Uh, I don't know why these politicians. They. It seems that they don't have sound systems that allow them to speak without shouting.
Hmm.
Jesse Jackson never shouted.
Hmm.
Are you old enough to ever have known about
I've read
followed Jesse
I've read
Jackson at
I've
all?
read a bit about Jesse Jackson, but he was before my time.
Jesse Jackson was a very eloquent man,
Yeah.
and white people, a lot of white people hated Jesse Jackson, and you know why they? I think they hated him so much. Jesse Jackson had a very strong pro-labor, pro-reconciliation platform, and very, a real rainbow coalition of
Yeah.
ethnic groups and so on. But Jesse Jackson was just one of the most fluent and eloquent speakers you can imagine. And when he got on a platform with other candidates, he could just run circles around them. But he didn't shout. He projected very well, but he didn't shout the way some of them do. It's a question of affect.
Yeah. So, do you see in the 2020 election, um, what's your opinion on the best way for Bernie to go forward with his message and kind of contrast himself with some of his uh, competitors or um, the establishment inside the Democratic Party? I'm not sure if you could hear me. Seems like your camera is frozen.
Well, we got dropped again.
Yep.
I have to pee in my jar. uh, so my father didn't shout. Uh, my father was sponsored to speak at the University of forum at the University of Chicago. I think when he was still in Congress, or shortly after he was defeated, and I heard him of course, it was a small gathering, and it was in a, university classroom at the University of Chicago. So it wasn't be at a rally of 20,000 people or something. And my father had a very thoughtful, people observed him at this meeting. And people would, in the audience, would ask him a question. And he wouldn't immediately start, and he wouldn't filibuster. He'd think a little bit, and then he would slowly and quietly answer the question that they asked. And that's unusual in a politician,
Yeah.
to answer the question that the person actually asks, rather than just regurgitate their talking.
Yeah. Deflect to something else. But
My
yeah, so
father had a very imposing and dignified bearing. He was 6'2". My brother and I are only 5'8". My father weighed about 250 pounds probably at the time, and was 6'2". Very handsome, had a very authoritative and imposing and highly dignified bearing.
so you said that your brother was also involved with the Liberty Union around that time?
Ah,
What
I
was
don't know that my brother has been very much active in Vermont politics. He's a very active person,
what's your brother's
but he's
name?
never run for office. And he was, when shortly after he went back to Vermont to teach at the University of Vermont, he was president of the NAACP of Vermont. Hardly any black people in Vermont at the time.
Yeah. What's your brother's name?
William L. Meyer,
Okay.
and he's a year older than I. He's still very active.
You said that he lives
And
around South Burlington?
he lives in West Rupert.
Oh, okay.
Uh, and he's, he was president. He had a business in Manchester Center, and he was, president of the Rotary Club, I think. And he was faculty representative on the board of directors of the University of Vermont. He was president of the faculty senate, I think. And one thing that has characterized my father and my brother and myself and my sister was we were very outspoken and not afraid to state a position. We're not very fearful people. So, for instance, in town meeting, we had town meeting once a year.
Yep.
In Rupert, Vermont, our town of about 400 people, 4 villages. And we had town meeting every year. I think it was in March. It was before the plowing season. It was in the wintertime.
Yeah.
And it was a real town gathering, and the town hall would be filled with people, and all of our 3 selectmen and our town clerk and our town treasurer and any other officers, the listers who did the appraisals, they were all elected by democratic vote at town meeting. I don't know if the elections were every year or there was some rotation, but I can't remember. But when people, but there were people whose families lived in the town and went back for 400 years,
Yeah.
and owned farms. And people didn't want to get into hostilities or fights with their neighbors over disagreements over public policy. So if people wanted somebody to carry the ball, we were immigrants to the state, we were outsiders. My parents were raised in Pennsylvania. My father came to Vermont as a forester for the Civilian Conservation Corps and as a county agent for the Soil Conservation Service of the Department of Agriculture, U.S. Department of Agriculture. So we were outsiders originally in Vermont. But when people wanted somebody to speak up about a public policy issue and they didn't want to speak up themselves, they'd come to my father because if it was something that should be done, he wasn't afraid to speak up and say it. And I'm not either, and my brother isn't either. So I think that the faculty at the University of Vermont liked my brother and put my brother forward for the same reason that my brother wasn't afraid of the board of trustees or the administrators of the University of Vermont. He wasn't afraid of what would happen to his career or his ambitions if he stood up to the administration.
Hmm.
So he was a good spokesman.
Yeah. So,
And of course, we got that from our father.
so was your father active every year in town meeting during those early
Well,
years
yeah, he usually spoke some at town meeting.
on agricultural matters usually,
That
or?
reputation, that reputation that Vermont farmers have for being taciturn, that was real.
Yeah.
People were reserved and taciturn. I don't know. Are they still in Vermont, or is that still sort of a
Yeah.
Vermont?
Generally, people are very, they keep to themselves, very respectful, very reserved. Um, but yeah. And we still have the town meeting tradition to this day. I go to town meeting every year. I think every state in the country should have town meeting just like New England does.
How big is your town?
My town, I live in Burke, so it's a town of maybe 1,000 people, and usually about 50 to 70 people show up to town meeting.
But only that number.
Yeah.
My brothers had the town meeting in Rupert now is moribund. They still have town meeting, but people don't participate in it.
Yeah, there's a problem with that. People becoming less active. And
But
I,
I've known in Nashville is now a city of about 600,000 people. It has unified county city government, Davidson County. And I'm very well known because I'm very active. I look somewhat distinctive because I have the beard and I'm old, and I often wear dress blue jeans. I'm a carpenter, so I dress kind of distinctively. I used to put on a suit and tie to go to Metro Council. Now I realize that if you want people, Gandhi and Yasser Arafat dressed distinctively,
yeah,
and they were kind of known. And the Pope dresses distinctively. Not that I favor running around in a white dress, but So I realized, okay, I wear clean blue jeans and so on. People, I stand out a little bit. So the politicians in Vermont, in Nashville, we have a very retail politics. We have 40 members of our metropolitan council. Someone can be elected in the district that I live in, where voter turnout isn't so great, but somebody can be elected. Well, the last member of the council, who has emailed me 4 or 5 times in the last few days about a meeting about gentrification, was elected on October 12th runoff, September 12th runoff, and he was elected by a margin of somewhere like 900 votes to 600 votes for his adversary. So you see how retail that politics is.
Yeah.
And this means that the members of the Metro Council, they realize that I speak a lot for the neighborhood and for the neighborhood organization that I'm a part of and an officer of. And I'm white, but for many years I was only a white person in a black organization. But uh, uh, they feel that I have influence that I can influence quite a few voters, a couple dozen voters maybe at least in the district, and that's an important number to be elected to the Metro Council from that district.
Yeah, so you can throw a bit of political weight around. You have a lot of influence.
And then for the community organization, the North National Organization for Community Improvement, which was probably named back in the, I don't know when it was started, but you know, Martin Luther King's organization, or the organization in Montgomery, was the Montgomery Improvement Association. So this idea of North National Organization for Community Improvement, people tend to name organizations similar to other organizations going on at the time, you know.
Yeah.
So it's an archaic kind of a name for a community organization, but I take the responsibility of inviting these politicians to speak to our group, and they're always happy to accept because that's the way they run for office in Nashville.
Yeah,
They
that's how
put
they
up yard
get
signs
their votes.
and they attend all kinds of community meetings. But when they attend the community meetings, citywide meetings, planning commission meetings, all kinds of meetings, they see me there. They begin to think, oh, this man is very active. And I am. So I know many of the members of the Metropolitan Council. They know that when I speak at council, or when I speak at a committee meeting, or when I speak at the planning commission, I always prepare my statement very carefully. I respect the 2-minute limit, and I don't ramble around or repeat what the other people said, or you know, so I'm able to, I have the respect of a lot of, I know the mayor, I know the vice mayor, I know because I know them when they were in Metro Council and when they were council at large, and
Yeah.
they're term limited in the council and council at large. So when they can't run for council anymore, they run for vice mayor, or they run for recorder of deeds, or they run for county clerk, or county court clerk, or county juvenile court clerk, or sheriff. You know, there's assessor, the county assessor, the county trustee who collects the taxes. There's 6 or 7 countywide elected. Oh, and then the judges are elected.
Yeah.
So members of council often, when they can't run anymore for council, they run for judge. So
Yeah. And you said you also know members of the state
I've been there for
representative.
22 years now, and so I go back with these people to when they were members of council,
Yeah.
and now they're vice mayor or they're county clerk. The
And
county clerk is an African American woman. When she sees me, she's very nice. She comes up to me and embraces me. The county assessor of deeds was in Metro Council. She supported some legislation that I was advocating for. She hugs me when she sees me. It's a very retail politics and very democratic.
yeah.
And I moved down there from Chicago, and I joke that when I lived in Chicago under the old Mayor Daley, it was the second tightest dictatorship in the world, second only to Joseph Stalin, under Richard J. Daley. I don't know if you've heard of him, but
No.
he had a very strong machine.
And so you said that you also know several members of the
In
Tennessee
Chicago.
legislature?
Huh?
You said you also know several members of the Tennessee legislature?
Well, I don't go to Tennessee legislature as much because I know my state representative, I know my state senator,
Yeah, and they used to be on the...
and I know one or two of the others, but I don't lobby at the state. Uh, we have a super majority. When I first moved there was a Democratic majority
What year did you move to Tennessee?
in 1997.
Okay. So you're not as active at the state level because of
There
the
was a Democratic majority
Republicans?
in both the state house and the state senate. And I believe we had two Democratic senators at the time.
Yeah. From what I understand, Nashville's a
But
very
now
democratic
there's a
area.
3/4 supermajority of nasty Republicans in the state house and the state senate. So it's really hard to do anything.
Yeah. But you said that the people that represent Nashville at the state level, you knew them from the city council originally?
Yeah,
And
not all of them,
but some of them, and
also
you're able to have influence on
we
them?
have a number of Protestant ministers that run these offices.
Okay. So,
There's a provision in our state constitution that ordained ministers can't serve in the state house or the state representative senate, but it's been declared to be a violation of the U.S. Constitution, so it's a dead letter.
yeah.
I don't know about the Vermont. Have you? I urge you, if you haven't done so, read the Vermont Constitution.
Yeah, I have before.
Is the Bill of Rights of the Vermont Constitution stronger than the federal Bill of Rights?
I'm not sure. I'd have to look at that specifically. But I'm sure if we have our own specific Bill of Rights, then I'm sure it is stronger than the U.S. Bill of Rights.
The Bill of Rights of the U.S. Bill of Rights was amendments to the original Constitution.
Yeah, the first 10.
The Bill of Rights of the Tennessee Constitution is Article 1 of the Constitution.
Yeah.
And it's something like 29 listed rights. And the First Amendment, well, there isn't the First Amendment, the first section of Article 1 of the free speech and assembly is that the right, freedom of speech, freedom of religion, the right to assemble for petition and to petition for grievances and to instruct your representatives, not just petition them, instruct them.
Yeah.
And then at the end, um, there's a strong provision about prisons, treatment of people in prisons. Not that it's respected, but it's there.
Yeah.
And at the end, very near the end of the Constitution, they tacked on another section, and it says the rights enumerated in Article 1 of this Constitution shall not be violated or abrogated under any pretext whatsoever.
Yeah.
So they added that extra thing that just said, listen, when we have this Bill of Rights, we mean it.
Yeah. But sadly, it hasn't been upheld.
Huh?
But sadly, it
So it's
hasn't been upheld
stronger
since
than
then.
the federal Constitution. And I represent myself pro se in court now, and I'm very effective. The judges always caution me about representing myself. And then at the end of the trial, often they convict me because they don't want to rule against the police and so on and so forth. They almost always say at the end of the hearing or the trial, Mr. Meyer, when you said you were going to represent yourself, I cautioned against it, or I recommended against it, but I got to say you did a very good job.
Yeah. Yeah, it's a
And the
problem.
public defenders are always eager to represent me
Yeah.
because they like what I'm doing.
You think that's a problem with a lot of people not understanding the extent of their rights and legal, the legal system that is set up to support them. People don't really know they might not know what's in the Bill of Rights or in their state constitution.
And they don't read the darn law under which they were cited.
Yeah.
I've I have a record of, I think, about 50% acquittal.
Hmm.
And lots of times, as I say, well, I'm convicted. The judge respects my argument and agrees with me, but they're local judges and they don't want to make a ruling that contradicts the policeman, the complainant.
Hmm. So
So what
they
they do is they convict me and then they give me the 1 month, 1 year, or 30 days of unsupervised probation.
yeah.
No condition.
Okay, well, I was gonna start to wrap up the
Yeah, I told you that you got to stop me.
yeah. So I had one last topic for you here,
Oh,
and
yeah.
and that is so going forward in today's political climate with the divisiveness and um, corruption and all of these challenges to overcome. What advice would you have for young people, people in the new generation, for getting involved in politics and government? And what advice would you have for them? And uh, do you see them being a powerful force going forward? Young progressive people such as myself and lots of people in Vermont that are looking at getting involved more in some way.
Well, sure. I mean, my lifetime of 62 years of social justice activism, I walked from San Francisco to Moscow for peace in 1961 with a team from the Committee for Nonviolent Action.
Hmm.
I walked from Chicago to Springfield during Holy Week. I was an active Catholic at the time, starting on Ash Wednesday and ending on Good Friday in the state capitol in Illinois,
Hmm.
uh, dragging a wagon behind me with a replica of an electric chair on it. I was in media, newspapers, television, radio, all over the state of Illinois in 1965. And we abolished capital punishment in Illinois that year. So, yeah, advise people to be very active and be involved, and but to do it from a Gandhian perspective, in that you always reach out to your adversary and you try to understand the point of view of your adversary, and you enter into dialogue with that person, and you recognize that that person has in some way a legitimate point of view.
Yeah.
They have grievances, they have goals, and so you have to look for a win-win solution, and never attack your adversaries or your opponents in a personal way. Always
Yeah.
show respect to them, and then they will show respect to you. The FBI come to visit me. I never gained the hostility of the FBI. The FBI says I'm a pacifist with a martyr complex. I have FBI and CIA files, and uh, and these judges, they disagree with me, but I don't attack people personally, and that's what's happening in our politics today. This um, extreme negativity and hostility. They say that in the House of Representatives, the Democrats and the Republicans barely talk to each other anymore.
Yeah.
On the picket line, sometimes the Quakers and other picket lines that I've been on in protests against war and on other issues, the people say, don't respond to the hecklers. They have their silent vigils. We all stand, and we don't respond to the hecklers. I never go along with that discipline. When the hecklers come and get up in your face, but I don't shout back at them, I don't threaten them, I engage in dialogue with them. I won't accept a discipline of silence on the picket line. You're there to communicate with people, not
Yeah.
to stand and look at them and not answer them.
Yeah.
It's all about communication.
Yeah. Reaching out to the other side.
Yeah.
And
And when you do that, you will have respect. And John McCain did that to some extent.
yeah.
He had respect from all sides. Now, I don't think he was any kind of a hero. I mean,
Yeah.
you're a hero if you go and bomb people's villages from 30,000 feet up in the air, and then you get shot down, and then you're going to complain because you're not well treated. you know?
Yeah. Yeah. I mean,
And
he had good anti-torture positions later on because of that, but he was still very imperialistic and
yeah,
didn't have the best foreign policy.
but
But
in terms of his relationship with his colleagues in the Senate and so on,
yeah.
he maintained a dialogue and a relationship with them, and worked with somebody like Russ Feingold on the campaign finance issue. And Russ Feingold was a very progressive member of the Senate from Wisconsin.
Yeah. So this advice you're talking about doesn't just apply to activism and the picket lines and stuff. Do you also give this same advice to young people looking to run for office and get involved on the inside of government and the political system and the
Well,
political
I had
parties?
advice early on. I had advice to work. I could work more effectively from the inside. Well, maybe I could. I mean, I'm as articulate, as intelligent, as thoughtful, as idealistic as Bernie Sanders. And look at, he's running for president of the United States, and I'm a carpenter talking to one young man.
Yeah.
I'm not talking to rallies of 20,000 young progressives.
Yeah, it is pretty amazing what Bernie's been able to do. Um, really awakening the minds of a lot of young people that were probably looking at the political system and not seeing much hope. But since his last
Well,
campaign
Bernie,
and this one,
yeah. But Bernie was in Mississippi Freedom Summer in the summer of 1961. I might have been there. But I was walking from San Francisco to Moscow. I was walking across Europe with a team of 30 pacifists, from 15 from America and 15 from European countries, to walk to Moscow.
yeah,
And he got a lot of attention all over the world. So that's what I was doing that summer. But two of my friends from Chicago, two of my good friends from Chicago, went down on the freedom rides that were continued out of Nashville. And they spent 30 days in Parchman, the famous Parchman Penitentiary in Mississippi, for riding integrated buses from Nashville into Mississippi in the South. And actually, another friend of mine, well, four friends of mine from the War Resisters League were on the first Congress of Racial Equality freedom ride uh, into the South in an integrated black and white riding together on the buses, uh, on the interstate buses. I think it was 1947 or 48. Bayard Rustin, uh, uh, several of them spent a sentence on a chain gang, I think in South Carolina. And another friend of mine, Jim Peck, was one of the people on the first in the 1961 Freedom Rides, the Congress of Racial Equality, a SNCC Freedom Ride. Uh, Jim Peck was pulled off the burning bus at Anniston, Alabama, or Birmingham, I forget which, and beaten with a pipe.
yeah,
So
yeah. So do you?
I had the opportunity to work. One of my friends, another one, retired to was one of Dave Dellinger, one of the Chicago Seven, and one of the most effective pacifist leaders against the Vietnam War and so on. He retired to a farm in Peacham, Vermont.
That's right near me, actually.
I visited Dave Dellinger in Peacham. His widow um, may still be living in Peacham. You might look her up.
Yeah, possibly. So do you see a lot of parallels between the sort of both the problems going on back in the 50s and 60s and the activists, what they were doing back then, and what's going on today with, we're still fighting against a lot of the same problems, and Bernie's rallying a lot of young people, and, they're having these marches, and do you see a lot of similarities?
Well, we were very focused on the issue of war because first ban the bomb movement, and then we moved to the anti-Vietnam War movement, and then in the 1980s we moved to Nicaragua, to Central American solidarity with uh, death squads operating in El Salvador and the Contras trying to overthrow the revolutionary government in Nicaragua. So we spent the whole decade of the 1980s on the Central America solidarity. But the contemporary activist and progressive movement in the United States spends much less energy and initiative on foreign and military policy issues.
Yeah. And I mean, you look at today, we're still involved in Iraq and Afghanistan, and there's a lot of
And
pushback
for
now
instance,
against that.
they're putting much more energy into anti-racism agitation in the United States and Black Lives Matter and so on. And that's very important. But you're talking, you know, a small number, relatively small number of black young men, and a few women actually, being killed or mistreated, badly mistreated by the police. But meanwhile, millions of people are refugees in Africa.
Yeah, in the Middle East.
They're trying to row across the Mediterranean Sea in rowboats, and you know,
Yeah,
they're risking their lives. So the suffering that is going on, and that the United States does very little that is positive to correct the economic and social problems that lead. And actually, I mean, uh, the U.S. and Western governments, the European governments, have created the refugee crisis.
yeah, yeah. These are all wars that we've started, and we've stirred up a lot of the problems that have made it worse for these people, so they had to become refugees, right?
and 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 the military, imperial military policy of the United States is manufacturing terrorists in the Middle East.
Yeah,
I was talking to, I was at the lumberyard today, and a young Vietnamese man that was brought when he was 5 years old, a boat, one of the boat people, refugees from Vietnam, and he saw I have displays about peace on the side of my van that I use for my work, and he saw that, and he came up and he was eager to talk to me, um, and he agreed with me. Uh, but one point I made to him was that Cuba, that the activists in Cuba, in Nicaragua, in any of these Latin American countries where the United States interfered and overthrew their governments and supported reactionary governments, or the Vietnamese, the Viet Cong, they never sent teams of people over to the United States to retaliate. They didn't hijack and shoot down planes. They didn't take retaliatory action. They fought back against U.S. troops if they were in their country, but they didn't take retaliatory action. But now we're messing around in the Middle East where these people have a strong culture of revenge. You kill me and members of my family, I'm going to get revenge. I'm going to come and get members of your family.
yeah. So a lot of these
So we're the
terrorist
U.S.
organizations.
The U.S. and Europe are manufacturing terrorists and refugees,
Yeah,
and then complaining about trying to come.
yeah, and then not doing anything to really address the problem, just kind of kicking the can down the road.
So I do think that activists should, and the military industrial congressional media complex, Eisenhower called it the military industrial complex. It's the military industrial media
Yeah, the media is part of that as
congressional,
well.
the military industrial congressional media complex in the United States. And there's a huge amount of money being spent and wasted, underpin a whole lot of the unsolved social problems that we have in our own country.
Yeah, the media has really failed at its job, I believe. The mainstream media. They either cover up a lot of the issues that matter and they try to push their own agenda, or they just totally ignore a lot of these issues.
Well, they were bought out by
Yeah,
corporate.
so it's against their financial interests.
Yeah, yeah. And the reporters pretend to be objective journalists and tout themselves for being such truth-oriented, fact-oriented, objective, nonpartisan, impartial reporters. But they to rise as journalists in the American media system, you have to understand self censorship.
Yeah, sadly, but that's true.
Because do you ever hear Noam Chomsky being interviewed on mass media?
No.
Never.
And that's kind of
And he was one of the most right on, best informed, articulate analysts in the country.
yeah.
But they never call on him as an expert.
I wonder why.
Well, you don't have to wonder for very long.
Yeah. But I think that's finally starting to change now with the rise of independent media online. People are able to hear voices from people and organizations that aren't bought out by corporations and such that are advertising on television and radio. Um, so
Yeah, but
I
you
think there's
and
finally
I,
voices people can hear from outside of that.
if you or I, the algorithms are sending us progressive posts. They aren't sending us the awful right wing stuff that is on the internet.
Yeah, but what I mean is people, if they go out and look for news online, they aren't limited to just CNN, Fox News, NBC. They're able to get viewpoints from outside of that spectrum, and they're able to get, if you put it all together, a more objective view of the news and of the government.
Well,
And
if you Google to try to get all points of view, but I'm not sure that the internet had a lot of promise, but I'm not sure that in balance that it's a positive force.
yeah, I mean, there's a lot of problems with these big internet and tech companies right now because they're kind of dictating censorship on their own platforms in
No.
a undemocratic way, in a way that kind of can go against the First Amendment in many ways. So there's something to be said about that. But in terms of when you have a platform that has um, a wide range of perspectives and views that are supported, um, and they're all independent, and they don't have financial backers pulling the strings in the back. I think you're able to get a more clear view of reality from a variety of those
Yeah.
outlets.
Well, I'm just saying, uh, you'd have to really do a scientific analysis to see whether in balance false and negative information uh, is outbalances.
Yeah, I mean, there's definitely plenty of false information out there on the internet right now, but
You'd have to look at the seesaw
yeah, but if you
see whether the to see whether the internet is a positive educational force or a negative educational force.
I believe that it is because if you compare this, even with all its flaws, to the consistent incorrectness of corporate media, CNN, NBC, Fox News, they're always reliably biased in favor of the establishment and in favor of the corporations. Whereas online, you can get a pretty good ratio of independent news that is unbiased and is objective as much
Yeah,
as
but you
possible.
also get fascism.
Yeah, but that's yeah, it's a give and take. In the fascists, if you
But
have
what I
a
said is, we don't know. You and I don't really know what's out there because the algorithms don't send this awful stuff to you and me.
yeah, and that's one of the problems with these big tech companies like YouTube and Twitter and Facebook, Google. So ideally, you would have the fascists and the Nazis and the radicals in the fringes, but through it being an open platform in a democratic debate of ideas, they would be pushed to the minority because people wouldn't listen to them as much as the people that, by and large, are seen as more objective and more reliable.
I go every day to Reuters, BBC, the New York Times, and Huffington Post. And I don't subscribe to the New York Times, so I only get 10 articles a month. But by the time I'm going to Reuters and BBC and Huffington Post, and Huffington Post is one of the most progressive news sites. I also go sometimes to Common Dreams, and my former wife, Kathy Kelly, who is a saint and a wonderful activist, international activist, often has articles on Common Dreams. But Common Dreams is a lot more just opinion. I read some opinion columns, but I read the news to try to get information. I'm able to figure out my own opinions, once I have some facts.
Yeah.
But then I go to Facebook.
And that's kind of like the melting pot. You see stuff from all over, everything your friends have shared.
Also, on Huffington Post and on Facebook, I sometimes get these, videos of segments from Stephen Colbert and Seth Meyers and the humorists, and it gives me something to laugh about.
Yeah.
So.
Are you familiar with any media figures on YouTube? Independent media shows on there?
Well, sometimes on my Facebook post, I get this what's his name, Randy Rayburn or whatever else.
I think
He's
I've heard of him.
You know him?
I'm not familiar with him.
I think Randy Rayburn or Rayburn. He's very funny.
Have you heard of?
He does parodies and and he does interviews with Trump, in which he asks Trump a question or something, or questions Trump about something, and then he takes some clip from.
Yeah. Have you heard of
some clip from published stuff about Trump, and that is apropos of the question that he has asked? And he's very clever. He's very clever. Try him. I'm not. I think it's Randy Rayburn. R-A-E-B-U-R-N, maybe.
Yeah, that name sounds familiar. Have you heard of the channel TYT, the Young Turks?
I don't think so.
Okay, they're one of the bigger ones on YouTube in terms of political independent media. The one that I subscribe to and listen to the most is this show called Secular Talk. It's hosted by a guy called Kyle Kalinske. I'm not sure if you've heard of him, but I'd recommend checking him out. He's a pretty good independent media host.
Yeah.
And just something I've noticed after watching these shows is they cover a lot of things that either the corporate media doesn't cover at all, or the corporate media spins it in their own way that's totally backwards from reality.
Well, I read the Tennessean every morning, so
Is that
in touch with local news and politics.
Is that the local newspaper?
NPR when I'm making meals, but NPR is terribly corrupted now.
Yeah, NPR. I listen to them in the car, but
not what it used to be.
Yeah.
They've been bought by their corporate sponsors.
Yeah.
So, I spend a couple hours a day maybe on the internet, and that's more than I raise most of my own food. I'm active in the community. I don't want to spend my whole iPhone
Yeah,
screen.
but it's just a good alternative to have the media online as an option instead of just being stuck to
Yeah,
the traditional media on television.
yeah.
But anyway, so yeah, you gave me your insight on where you see young people, young activists going from here now. So uh, I really
I
value
wish
your perspective.
I was in prison more often. Uh, I was certainly probably the most publicized and best known activist in Chicago for many years. Uh, One of my friends put me as an entry in the Chicago Encyclopedia. uh, but I don't do as much as nonviolent action that involves going to jail now because it isn't as effective educationally as it was when I started doing it 62 years ago.
Yeah,
Culture changes. So I'm more active actually in education and political education and so on now.
just another quick question. When was the last time you were arrested?
Well, that's it. I'm kind of ashamed to say I think it was 10 years ago.
So is that the longest streak you've had in between arrests?
uh,
10 years?
I think it's the longest period. Um, yes, I think it's the longest period in my adult lifetime, yes.
That's great. Well,
Although I did take somewhat of a break and dealt with my romantic life and so on. Well, no, uh, as the Vietnam War, I don't think I was arrested after 1969 or 70, maybe, on the Vietnam War. Oh, well, no, I was in prison in 1971, 72 for 9 months for war tax refusal. And then my next arrest was I was arrested 7 times in 1980 and 81, opposing the renewal of registration for the draft.
yeah. So
So
it was a
yeah,
it was
so
a it was a very
from
periodic thing for you.
from I think from 72 on, I think my next arrest was 1980. So that wasn't.
So it was a
Now I'm in the. It may have been 2007. May have been the last time.
all right. So it seems like there was always
I'm
something,
not proud of that.
but it seems like there was always something worth protesting and getting arrested for throughout your life.
But I have a perspective on it. Like I have Catholic worker friends that have just been convicted in down in Georgia, Kings Bay, Georgia, for plowshares. I knew Daniel Berrigan was a friend and spiritual advisor to me for many, many years until his death a few years ago. And his brother, Philip Berrigan, who was a priest who married a nun and was a person who started the plowshares movement of nonviolent destructive actions against military weapon systems. Uh, and some of my Catholic worker friends were just convicted a few days ago in Kings Bay, Georgia, for going onto some nuclear submarine or something and damaging the weapon systems. But now, when I think about that, first, it's, you know, a mosquito bothers you, huh?
Yeah.
But it has very little effect on your behavior, right? Well, some people are stay inside because of mosquitoes. But
Yeah. So there's always a reason to get out there and get
so
directly
that's what we
involved.
are to the military-industrial complex and militarism. They're like a flea or a tick or a. We don't do them any damage, and we don't fundamentally change their behavior.
Yeah. So,
But what we do, so when they do that kind of an action, the only response of the military industrial complex is they spend more money on security
yeah.
because they're embarrassed by the fact that an 85-year-old woman can cut through and a couple other young Catholic worker actors could cut through fence at the Oak Ridge National Laboratory where they, make the uranium warheads for nuclear bombs, and that she could cut through the security fence and get to the building where these, you know, highly volatile systems are stored.
Yeah.
So what
They're
do they do?
embarrassed.
They spend more money on security
Yeah.
and more money on judges and more money on prisons.
Yeah. The whole infrastructure around that.
No, the governments don't want to put people like you and me in jail for nonviolent protest anymore. They want to put us on probation or give us time served, 2 days in jail or something like that.
Catch
They
and
don't have room
release.
in the jails for us.
Yeah.
Back when I was being arrested in the late 50s and early 60s, sometimes 4 or 5 times a year, they had room for me in jail. They had a
Yeah.
bed for me.
But now they're all full, all the prisons.
The
Right?
last time I served 6 months in federal prison in 2001 for the School of the Americas action, trespassing at the School of the Americas in Fort Benning, Georgia, Columbus, Georgia. I got to the prison in Arkansas the day before 9/11, and they didn't have enough beds. They put me and one of the other prisoners who was just arriving in the same bed. And we went to this bed, and there were two of us, and so we got in touch with the people running that dormitory and said, "Wait a minute." They had to put him in a temporary transit or a small unit where they had for people that were being disciplined in some way or
Yeah.
being segregated in some way because it was the only bed they had left in the prison.
Yeah. But I was gonna start wrapping up the interview here.
Yeah,
So,
yeah, and I
so,
got to work tomorrow.
so, do you have any final closing message for anybody young or old that's currently seeing the state of politics and government today and wants
Yeah.
to make change?
One piece of advice for you: don't allow yourself to follow that um, tired out but somewhat true that people are radicals and revolutionists when they're young, and then they become conservative when they get older. Don't do that.
Don't follow that.
Start radical and stay radical because we need radical fundamental change in our society.
Yeah. And we have people like you and Bernie Sanders who have paved the way for younger people like myself and many others that are currently getting involved and trying to reshape our government for the better. So, thank you
And a lot of
for,
my peers
yeah,
dropped the ball.
yeah, I guess you could say that. But, so thank you for your time this evening, and I'll let you get on with that. But it was really good speaking with you tonight.
Yeah. Well, call again. And come and visit me in Tennessee if you ever pass down that way.
Yeah, I know there was just a political convention down there in Nashville this past week. So I knew some of the
When?
people just this past week. There was a
You
convention.
were in Nashville a
I,
week ago?
I wasn't there. I knew some of the people that were there,
Oh,
but there was a convention called Politicon. I'm not sure if you heard of that.
I think I have, yeah.
Yeah, but
Is it isn't that a conservative one?
it's not conservative or progressive. It's
Oh,
all parts of the political spectrum. They bring everybody in. It's a pretty big event. They bring in media. They have debates and panels with people. So
oh,
yeah, so it was pretty cool to see. They usually have it in Los Angeles, but they had it in Nashville this year. But
yeah.
yeah, so
That's because of all the fight we carried on and lost about their $500 million convention center.
oh yeah, that's probably where they had it take place. But yeah, we'll speak again sometime, and
Yeah,
yeah, it was good talking with you. So
yeah,
good
great.
night.
I was happy to talk to you.
All right. So good night, and I'll speak with you again sometime.
Yeah, okay, bye.
All right. 5 stars. All right. So yeah, just wrapped up my interview there with Karl Meyer. So he's a longtime activist, son of U.S. Representative William Meyer, who was one of the founding members of the Liberty Union Party here in Vermont, along with several others, including Bernie Sanders. And he was just sharing some history that he'd been a part of with political activism and picketing, anti-war, um, talking about the lack of representation for poor people in this country back in the 50s and 60s. So yeah, it was pretty cool to hear firsthand from a guy who was there throughout all of that and was part of many of the same activist um, organizations as Bernie Sanders back in the 60s. He went to school in Chicago. Um, so yeah, it was interesting to hear his take on the comparisons between the struggles back then with politics around the Vietnam War and what else was going on? The corruption that was going on back then, and comparing that to today with the divisiveness between the parties and the control that the establishment has on the government right now. What do I think about impeachment on Halloween? Impeachment of Trump? I heard the House is going forward with their impeachment proceedings or whatever. So, yeah, hopefully by the end of the year they can wrap that up and get it onto the Senate and have them vote to not remove Trump from office, because there's no way they're going to get enough Republicans to vote, but at least they can say that they had that proceeding go through. The sooner the better, because we need to get on with the 2020 election. But yeah, I didn't do much for Halloween. I mean, they had this event in one of the towns nearby at a park where they had a big Halloween event. Kids were going around. I grabbed one single item of candy. But yeah, so if anybody has any questions in chat, thank you, by the way. I'm really important for the raid. I wasn't really able to interact much with chat during that interview. It was kind of fast-paced, but thank you all for stopping by. But yeah, the history of the Liberty Union Party and the pacifist movement in Vermont and around the country was pretty cool to hear about. And I mean, I'd read quite a bit about it beforehand, but this is a guy who him and his family were directly involved with all this stuff back then. Your town is a time capsule so you can see trick-or-treaters. I'm not sure if in the rest of the country trick-or-treating is becoming less of a thing. It's still a thing here in Vermont. What state are you in, Kikyo? Let me check this real quick. Yeah, we need Bernie to get back up above that 20% point line. You're in Oklahoma. So is there quite a bit of support for Elizabeth Warren there in Oklahoma, her home state? There's me. Yeah, and he was talking about the U.S. senators that we had back then. They were all Republicans, but they were all pretty progressive and liberal. They had some conservative tendencies here and there, but they were all very liberal, even if they were conservative. Never any authoritarianism coming out of Vermont. She was saying that these were all guys that him and his father knew. And there's his father, William H. Meyer. So he was elected in 1958. And then he ran for, looks like he ran for the Senate in 1962, 64, and 70. And he was a state delegate for the Democratic Party in these years, 56 through 68. And then, yeah, he was part of the founding of the Liberty Union Party in the 1970s. And he ran again for Congress in 1972. So, yeah, it's a long history that his family had here in Vermont politics. But it's 11:45 here, so I was going to wrap up my stream. But yeah, that was a good interview. And I was playing a game earlier in the stream. So, happy Halloween to everybody out there that's doing stuff today for that. Either going to parties or handing out candy or whatever. And yeah, so following the advice of Karl Meyer, we should all be getting involved, getting our friends involved, making sure everybody's going and voting, educating people on all these issues. The presidential primaries are coming right up in a few months. And also there's some state elections happening within the next week in a few states. So make sure everybody's voting. And let's get somebody from outside the establishment, Bernie Sanders, the Democratic nomination, and let's put that man in the White House. So that's it for the stream right now. I'm not sure when I'll be streaming next, but hopefully soon. And yeah, so good night, everybody. I might find somebody to raid, but yeah, that's it for the stream tonight.